Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Stacy, and I'm a bookseller and the events coordinator at Belmont Books. Belmont Books, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we have a number of virtual events coming up, including our monthly bedtime story time tomorrow night, and Connie Bywald in conversation with Patricia Smith on Monday. You can register for these and our other events on our website, belmontbooks.com, which is also where you can purchase tonight's book, 123. If you have any questions for the authors, please type them into the Q&A section and we will get to as many questions as we can. We're very excited to welcome Laurie and Julie. I want to tell you a little bit about them and then I will turn the event over to them. Laurie Frankel is the New York Times bestselling award-winning author of 4 novels, including The Atlas of Love, Goodbye for Now, and the Reese's Book Club and Hello Sunshine book pick, This Is How It Always Is. Her writing has also appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, Publishers Weekly, People Magazine, LitHub, the Sydney Morning Herald, and other publications. Laurie is the recipient of the Washington State Book Award and the Endeavor Award. Her novels have been translated into more than 25 languages and have been optioned for film and TV. A former college professor, Laurie now writes full-time in Seattle, Washington, where she lives with her husband, daughter, and border collie and makes good soup. As a journalist, Julie Carrick Dalton has published more than 1,000 articles in the Boston Globe, Business Week, The Hollywood Reporter, and other publications. She contributes to Dead Darlings, The Writer Unboxed, and Grub Street's writer blogs. Julie also owns and operates a small farm in rural New Hampshire, the backdrop for Waiting for the Night Song, her debut. And without further ado, I will turn the event over to Laurie and Julie.
Thank you, Stacy.
I'm so excited to be here with you, Laurie. I loved your book, and I was hoping that maybe you could, give our audience a little overview of what your book's about before we get started.
For sure, I can, and me too. I'm so excited to be here with you. I loved your book too, and yeah, it's nice when people love each other's books, and I don't know, predictable maybe. I think that it's that people write books that they love, I suppose, and so you are in fact likely to love books. By people who love your books. So it's nice it worked out. Yes, I have written this book. It is called 123. I'm going into my 3rd week of book tour, so it's just out. But I have done all of these events, so you'd think I would be getting pretty good by now at talking about it. Though it's always hard because books are so big, and so you want to say like, oh, it's about this thing and the other thing and some other stuff, and that's not elevator pitchy. So my elevator pitch is, it is about a very small town with a very dark past, which proves to be not so past after all. And my sort of like, if the elevator's going a little bit further pitch, is that it's about triplets, which is where the title comes from. It's about these 3 girls who narrate the novel in turns. They're teenage sisters, and they lived downstream from a chemical plant that was polluting their water before they were born, on account of which fact they and everyone that they live with has suffered some pretty significant consequences and challenges as a result. And their mother has been waging a lawsuit against this corporation for 17 years. And when it turns out that this chemical plant is less defunct than one might ideally hope, these girls have to take matters into their own hands and figure out their path, which is not their mother's path, but is a different way.
I love it. I so enjoyed reading the book, and when Belmont Books reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to be in conversation with you, my immediate answer was just yes. And I knew who you were, and I knew other book titles, but I didn't know anything about this book yet. But when Belmont Books asks me something, I say yes, because it's so good to me. I actually wrote part of my novel, Waiting for the Night Song, in the cafe at Belmont Books.
Oh,
and they embraced me as a writer before I had an agent, before I had a book deal. So they're a very special bookstore. So I hope everybody out there, of course, I hope they buy Laurie's book, maybe buy my book, but buy a book from Belmont Books, because they have been such a wonderful resource for this community, especially during the pandemic. But so when they reached out to me, I didn't have any idea what your book was about, but I just said yes. And then I got the book, and I was so grateful that they thought of me, because this is such a book for me. I felt like you wrote this book for me. Everybody else can enjoy it too, but I secretly feel like you wrote it for me. I love books that engage, the environment, nature, and climate activism, environmental activism. And this book, it's a compelling story, but it also has a lot of big themes in it, that are out there. And it was for those of you who are listening that aren't from the Belmont area. I lived for a long time in Woburn, Massachusetts, which is really just a couple towns over. And it's this location of, if you read the book or the movie, A Civil Action, which is about a leather tannery that dumped chemical waste and polluted the water. And my house right now sits out on the water where that Aberjona River dumps into the Mystic Lake. And every day I look out, and that waterway is what I see when I look out my window. So this story of your small town and these amazing women that stood up to fight for it, it was so powerful and meaningful to me personally. So thank you for writing it.
Oh,
But
thank you.
I would love to start by talking about the sisters. There's so much to unpack, but the sisters, their voices. So the sisters, they refer to themselves as 1, 2, 3, which I loved, according to their birth order. And they're very different. They have very unique voices. You label your chapters 1, 2, 3 by who's speaking, but I feel like I would have known without the labels. Their voices are very distinct from each other. They complement each other. They're funny in different ways, but they're very different in that, one of them, is in a wheelchair. She doesn't have access or use of most of her body except one hand, and she can only speaks through a tablet. She's brilliant, but she doesn't have full, mobility. One of them, from my read, is on the autism spectrum somewhere, and is a very particular view of the world. And their voices are so full. And their lives are full. They have crushes. They have people who have crushes on them. They have these very full teenage girl lives, which I appreciated. And I wanted to know how you did that. Like, what was your research process? And did you have people read for you? I was just really inspired by how full and rich and complicated all three of these girls were.
Yes. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad. Yeah, I love them. I mean, I love all three of them. I think that you probably fall in love with your narrators along the way, almost always, but these girls in particular, I think because they're girls, felt very, and because I suppose they're so strong and yet so vulnerable and because I am a mother, that I feel motherly towards them in a way that I think I don't usually feel towards my characters, and I miss them in a way that I don't usually, I think, with my characters. They're very different from one another. I am so glad that you said that you could tell them apart without the chapter titles, because that was what I kept saying to myself, that this book has to be such that if it fell open on the bed, you would be able to tell just by looking at the page which girl you were hearing from, because they had to sound really different, because they are really different. As you say, they navigate the world very, very differently from one another. So they each tell their own story, but they join together to tell this whole story. And they are really, they each have things that are in common with me. I think I have equal things in common with each of them, but they're very different from me because I am not a teenage girl. I used to be, but it's been 30 years. They're really different. They're really different from each other. How I did it, I did a lot of research. I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of thinking about it, but mostly I revised. In early drafts, they all sounded alike, and they all sounded like me. And as I say, that was not appropriate. One of the things is that, my vocabulary isn't great, but it's better than it was when I was 16. And so I needed to dial them back a little bit. And just so that they sounded believably smart, basically, so that their engagement with vocabulary was a little bit more mindful, I think. So Mab is studying for the SATs, and so she's using these big words, but she's using them on purpose and not always correctly. And so it was little tweaks like that. It took a lot of revisions until they started to sound sufficiently different from me and different from each other. It took a lot of, I cut like 300,000 words from this book.
Oh my goodness.
So that's the short answer to your question.
That's a lot. Yeah.
I cut a lot.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. And so was there one sister that came to you first when you were coming up with this story? Did you have all three of them in mind and then you ran with it, or did you come to them one at a time?
Yeah, God, that's such a good question. They came to me all together, but not quite in their current form. But I knew going in that I wanted to look at as wide a swath as I could manage without the book becoming overly long, yeah, so that I could look at different varieties of consequences, basically. How this polluted water, and this catastrophic event could impact people differently. So if I could have done six of them and sold you on the idea of having six children, I would have. But three was about what I could do. So yeah, that idea going in was like, they will be triplets, and they will be different in this way. They'll have different abilities, and they will have different disabilities, and they will have different lifestyle approaches, and different personalities, even as they're growing up in a small house in a small town with their one mother, and
Yeah.
so they came to me together, and then they came to me too close together, and then they kind of took their own paths as they went along.
Well, I really loved all of them. A lot of times when there's books with more than one narrator, I tend to always have a favorite. The one that
Yeah.
I don't have a favorite in these sisters. Like,
Oh,
oh
good.
no, Monday's my favorite. No, Maribel's my favorite. No, I just love them all. But something that you do, and don't worry, I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but there's this thing that you do later in the book where you've defined them as individuals, but there's this moment when they all come together and work almost as one person in a way. And it, to me, gave me chills when I read that, because I saw the love, the respect they shared for each other, and all these differences and arguments they have with each other, and disagreements coming together in this moment where these three sisters do this bold, brave thing, and they sort of act as one person. And I loved that about the book, because I thought they were very distinguished individually, but you defined their sisterhood and their tripletness. That's not really a word, tripletness, but their life together was really beautiful. So there's something else I really wanted to that was on my mind a lot, and I was reading, is about the town of Bourne. So it's a fictional town that you created where this environmental disaster happens. And I read it, in some ways, it was like a dystopia and a utopia simultaneously. And that fascinated me, the way you pulled this off. That I would say it's dystopian in that this town has had this disaster that's affected a whole generation. People have died, people are born without limbs or have had lost limbs. There's so many people in the town with mobility issues that every single place in the town has ramps and is accessible, because I think about a third of the kids, I believe you said, are in wheelchairs or have mobility concerns. And a lot of them have developmental and intellectual disabilities because of this contamination. So this town doesn't look like any other town. So in a way, you could say it's dystopian in that they've had this disaster, but it's also utopian, because how beautiful is this town in the way they treat each other and the way they see each other, and they see each other's full personhood, not their disability, or that there's a line in there that I'm going to bungle, but you said one of the characters says something like that their teachers and their mothers don't like them saying like birth defect or birth or abnormality. It's an anomaly, it's not a negative, it's just part of who they are. And there's immigrants in this story who feel welcome in this town because people just see them for the person that they are. So I felt like you somehow created a dystopian utopia, and I'm just curious how you built that town, because it was disturbing and sad, but kind of beautiful too.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I'm thrilled, because that was exactly my hope. And indeed, we tend to think it is one or the other, and I think we feel and should feel both about this town. They have been terrifically abused. What has happened to them is quite terrible, and not accidental, and systemic, and and generationally awful in a way they will never recover from. And I didn't want to minimize that, but I did want to think about what that looks like 20 years on. I did a lot of reading, and I did a lot of research, and the newspaper articles all talk about long-term health effects. And and they're newspaper articles, so they're not thinking about long term. They're only reporting on the immediate. And I was really very concerned about, well, I mean, what do we mean when we say long term? What do long term health effects look like? Um, and and the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to me that even if that these towns that are that that a town like this that has this higher incidence of disabilities, that those in fact are going to be differently disabling than in other towns. That these issues of diagnosis and accessibility and mobility are different if one is not in the minority, if one is in a town that has been purpose built. And so indeed, if lots of people use wheelchairs and there are lots of ramps everywhere, and all of the buildings are accessible to wheelchairs, then that becomes easier to navigate in a wheelchair. And that just seemed, sort of necessary to me. That is, like, I didn't sort of set out to write it. It just worked its way in, I think, because I think so many of the ways in which we make things inaccessible is a result of how we think of majority versus minority cultures, and we're not great at that. And the other thing then that went into all of this is that this is a really supportive community, and I am in favor of really supportive communities. I'm very moved by that. I think it is. I think it is and must be, I hope, the way of the future. I think it's one of the things we have learned this year the very hard way is the necessity of the greater good and the ways in which individual people can support each other to nourish a community. And it's not because they don't have significant grievances, and it's not because they all agree on the way forward, and it's not because they have a lot of money. It's for a different reason. It's this notion of having conversations and listening to one another, and trying everyone's best for everyone.
And I also appreciated that everybody in the town didn't agree on what to do. Like there was a conflict within the town about how to move forward. There's a lawsuit that's been in the works for, for decades, that there comes a time where some of them want to pursue it and some of them see another path and they don't agree, but they're still a community. And even with their grievances and their difference, and that they're, they kind of accept each other's positions as is okay. It was just, I thought it was really well done, and it wasn't done in this like inspirational way. Like I didn't read it as like that any of these characters were inspirational. They were real, and they were fighting for like truth and justice. And I was thinking that Aaron Brockovich and all these characters that we've come to find, these badass women who are just standing up for truth just because it's their truth and it's real and it's their communities. And I really enjoyed that about the book, because it just like I just wanted to yeah
Good. Oh, I'm so glad. I didn't want it to be cheesy, and I never want it to be cheesy. It is something that I can't stand as a reader, and that I try to avoid as a writer. And of course, where that line gets drawn varies from reader to reader. But it was important to me that they be angry with one another and angry with what had happened to them, that they be able to fight, that they have grudges that have lasted for decades. I just think like this is what happens when you live in a small town. If in that close quarters with people, even if you hadn't been totally screwed, you would definitely not agree on everything, and you would definitely be angry. So I didn't want it to be cheesy, and I didn't want it to be like sparkly inspirational. Just that you should end it feeling moved.
They were just
fine line.
I completely agree. So I want to also ask you about your research about the the chemicals. You seem to be quite knowledgeable about these different chemicals and what effects they have on people and how corporations try to hide what they're doing. And I'd love to know if there were certain incidences that inspired the book, or was it kind of a compilation of news articles you read, or how you did the research, because it felt pretty compelling.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, both is the short answer. In January 2016, I read an article in the New York Times Magazine by Nathaniel Rich about a town in West Virginia that was downstream from a chemical plant that had been polluting their waters. And the lawyer who took on the class action lawsuit and and proceeded to fight in court for, it's been like 25 years now. They made a movie about it called Dark Waters. And in fact, Nathaniel Rich just had a book. It came out in the beginning of May, I think, called Second Nature, and
Oh, okay.
of which that piece is the first chapter. You should read it. It's a remarkable collection of essays about climate reporting and just really interesting
Oh,
climate
it's
reporting.
Second Nature, is that what you said?
Second Nature, yeah.
Okay,
It's
I'll
got
have to
a,
look for that.
hold on. This is the limits of my earbuds.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I love
Isn't
it.
that the coolest cover?
Yeah. Oh, look at that. Belmont Books is on top of it. They already dropped
Okay,
it.
good.
No, I'm
Yeah.
definitely going to have to get that. Sounds like right up my alley.
It is. It's a really, really remarkable collection. And that was, I read this article and it went in my brain and I just could not stop thinking about it in that way that happens sometimes. And I thought, this is really, really remarkable, to be suing for 25 years, and a case that is just so obviously, the company is so obviously in the wrong, and so much in the wrong. It's such an extraordinary wrong, and I just couldn't get over it. And then once I started paying attention, as often happens, what I realized was that what's remarkable is the length and the tenacity of the lawsuit, but not, in fact, unfortunately, the fact of the pollution. Because the more I started paying attention and reading, the more I realized that one has but to pick up a newspaper every day to find examples of exactly this corporate malfeasance that is manifesting as polluted water, and polluted air and polluted soil. And though the particulars vary widely, this is in fact happening all over the country and indeed all over the world, and not accidentally, and not as an unfortunate byproduct, but actually as part of the plan. It is a colossal, systemic, heartbreaking, enraging problem. And as I say, what the words I kept reading over and over and over again were long-term health effects. And, and that is not necessarily the purview of current events. That is the purview of novelists. And so that is what I started to do. I started to read everything I could find about this. However, I also was really keen to not pin this on any one incident or one company or one town.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I mixed them up, and in fact went to lengths to make sure that you cannot locate this town. I went back at some point in late edits and took away all references to, at some point they went up to Boston, and I didn't even want that. This could be any direction. Who knows? Maybe it's over from Boston. I don't know. And because indeed this is happening all over the place, and so I wanted to make sure that that the town feels like it could be anywhere.
No, I love that. And, as I mentioned, being here where I live, when I don't live in Woburn anymore, but I live one town over, and that waterway that dumps into the lake where I look out my window, the sediment under the lake has all these toxic elements that have sunk to the bottom, and there's layers of sediment on top of it. So the water doesn't test as dangerous now, but if that lake is dredged, it's all still down there. And so it's a really kind of a weird, people swim in this water now, which freaks me out a little bit. But when I look out the window, it's beautiful. And the water we have swans and we have bald eagles this year. It's beautiful, but underneath it, I know, if it was dredged, all of that's going to come back up, which is really terrifying. And it just, I have not done research like you have about how widespread it is. I kind of thought of it as the thing happening in my backyard.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a lot of backyards.
That's exactly what it is. It's a lot of backyards. And though the particulars vary, it's in a lot of backyards. And I think that means that people think oh, that is happening over there. It is not happening where I am. And first of all, it probably is happening where you are, if in a different way. Maybe for you, it's not that you live downstream from a chemical plant, but that you live near a farm, and the runoff from the farm, like factory farming, is polluting your land. Or near me, it's firefighting chemicals from the Air Force Base, and that is getting in the water. And what the way I've been saying it is, we all live downstream. If you think this stuff isn't in your water, you are wrong. It is in your water. They are forever chemicals. They they don't go anywhere. They float around a lot, but they go into your body and they do not come out again. And, you know, and then the other thing, as I say, is that I feel like what we've learned this year is that even if it isn't your backyard, it's still your backyard. So we need bigger backyards, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. And I know you and I talked offline about this a little bit, but I just read How Beautiful We Were by Mbola Mbwe, which is a very different book, but it has this similar of a small town in a fictional town in Africa that had an American oil company that pollutes the water, and all these people get sick, and they're having these decades-long battle, and how infuriating it is for, you know, individual voices to stand up to these powerful companies. And I didn't read these two books near each other on purpose. But as I felt like your two books were speaking to each other a little bit in my experience.
Yeah, I did too. And I mean, and indeed, these books came out, I think her book came out in March or April. I mean, very recently.
Yeah.
It is on people's minds, and it's a beautiful, beautiful book.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot in this space. And another book that I recently read is called A Spy in the Struggle by Aya De Leon. And it's not as much about a disaster, but it's about the political movement of young people. It's more about the movement than about the after effects of the actual, like the toxicity, about what the actual impacts are, but about the movement and about environmental justice and racial justice in the, you know, environmental movement and activism. I think you would like that one too. Yeah, it's called Spy in the Struggle. Yeah, I feel like there's so many books in this category of fiction right now that are grabbing attention because this is our world.
Yeah, because it's so important. It hardens me that people are talking about it and writing about it and reading about it, certainly.
Absolutely.
But it's true that it is a conversation we are having because push has come to shove.
So what are you reading right now? What isn't like inspiring you either with this book or what you're working on next? Are there stories that are just jumping out at you right now? I know it's a huge question, but
no, I mean, it's not. I'm looking at like, what do I have that I can pull off here?
Yeah, I love to know when I know a writer whose writing I like, I imagine they're reading books I would like. So that's me personally wanting to know what you're reading.
I do. I mean, also I have so many good books. Okay. We should talk about this book too. Okay. See, it's hard when I sit next to my bookshelf and I think, oh, we could talk about this. We could talk about this.
Yeah, there's so many good ones.
This book is a book that I'm recommending to everybody.
Oh my goodness. You mean this book?
Okay, have you read this one yet? The next one?
You mean this one?
Loved these books. I've been recommending them to everyone. Did you love them?
You know what? I haven't read Once We Were Wolves yet. I just got the early copy of it a few days ago, so I haven't started it. But that's really funny. I think we do have similar tastes, don't we?
And good taste, which is important.
Good taste.
You know, I loved both of them. I loved Once There Were Wolves better.
Wow, that's a high bar.
We'll have to talk again.
Yeah.
When you've read it. But that book comes out in August.
Yes.
So people should pre-order it from Belmont Books because
Once There Were Wolves.
Then look at that cover. It's so beautiful.
I know. It's you need to look at it in person. It doesn't do justice on a screen.
As this one too, I think is a really nice cover because it's full of ice. It's nice and cool, and you know, people are hot because it's summer now, not here but other places. This is an interesting climate book. Do you know?
I have not read that. No.
Okay, love this book. Actually, all of her books. She's got 3 novels and going on 4, all of which are really different, interesting takes on. They're not necessarily books that you would call climate fiction per se, but they definitely are, and in really interesting ways.
Thanks for the recommendation, because that's my absolute favorite category of books are things that are, you know, nature, climate, environment.
Yeah, all of her books are for you, and she's such a beautiful writer, and they're such interesting books, and they're books that are, well, as I say, I think it's really interesting. I think books that are about climate change per se are interesting, but then I also really am interested in the books that you wouldn't necessarily categorize that way.
Yeah.
But that definitely are. Her new book comes out, Ruth Ozeki's new book comes out in, I think it's early October, but it might be late September.
Okay.
And it's apparently like a companion to this one. So you haven't read this one yet.
Oh, I better get on that one first then. Okay.
American War.
Oh, love that book.
Yes.
Omar Al-Akkad, I love him.
And he has, and that is cli-fi in a very interesting way. And he has a new book coming out in August. So also good for ordering.
Yeah, he was one of the very first blurbs I got from my book was from Omar Al-Akkad.
Oh,
He was one of the first people who
wonderful.
ever endorsed my book, which was lovely for me.
Yeah, it is. He is lovely. He's so smart and such a good writer.
So what are you
Um,
working on now? Do you have another book in the works that we can be looking forward to? Anything you could tell us about?
I mean, I have another book in the works that you should be looking forward to, but not holding your breath about because
Okay.
well, I mean, first of all, because it turns out to be challenging to write when the child never goes to school,
Yes.
remote schooling definitely put a dent in my productivity levels. And I'm writing the next novel. I'm always writing the next novel. Are you?
I am. Yeah, I have a book it's actually due on October 1st, so I'm like in the thick of it right now. It's coming out in early 2023.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and
See,
it's also a it's like kind of a near future book about it's called The Last Beekeeper, and it's
oh,
about the relationship between a father who's a beekeeper and his daughter that's kind of coming undone as the bees are dying.
oh,
I also am a beekeeper, so this is a passion project for me. So I'm really excited. It has a lot of, as you can imagine, a lot of environmental and climate themes in the background. I mean, the
yeah.
relationship is always, and actually, I'd love to talk to you about this. When you're writing about big themes, as you are, how I mean, I find it really important when I'm reading these books that the story is what's moving me through it, not the themes. And when my book has, and Waiting for the Night Song has environmental climate change themes in it as well. But it was really important for me that the characters and the story and the plot be in the front, and that's what pulling people through the book. And then the themes and the ideas kind of like seep through. But I was wondering how you think about that, about the relationship between plot, theme, character when you're writing.
That is exactly what I think about it. I want it to be. I mean, I try to write what I want to read, and what I want to read always is some plot driven by good characters in good relationships, and I want it to be saying something.
Yeah.
I want to learn something. I want it to be important somehow in some way. And I don't want to be lectured or hit over the head with anything. So so that is what I try to write, and it is hard, and it is why I mean, it is what draws me to novels
Yeah.
is the kind of surface impossibility of doing that.
Yeah,
you know
it's a balance,
yeah, and it's a difficult balance, and it's an interesting one. So I'm always very interested in the ways in which um, people manage to braid theme through plot, or lessons through stories. I think too that novels are about what characters learn. I think that
Yeah.
like broadly that is what a novel does, and it takes someone who doesn't know and isn't right, and brings them through until they until they learn something, and does it by braiding and interweaving all of these threads along the way, and and so it's not that it doesn't like lend itself to that, but I think that that is what makes it challenging, and therefore interesting. It's why I write novels, but it's also why I'm almost always reading one.
What are you reading right now? Was that one of the books that you just shared?
Oh, these things I'm reading right now. Well, I am still making my way through this, which is not a
Okay.
novel,
Okay.
because it is a series of essays, and they're all very different from one another,
Yeah.
which is a different kind of
Yeah.
of reading than usual. I am recommending these days, and have just finished Sarah Santilli's, which is also new book, which is also a memoir. Um, it's about foster care. It is a beautiful, beautiful book, and she is a beautiful, beautiful writer. And I think that one's on loan to someone. I am reading this book. I've just finished this book.
Oh, I
Reading
don't know that
Laura's
book either.
because I conversed with her by way of book tour, and and in fact, I was rereading it because I heard this book came out just at the very beginning of the pandemic, and so I did this with her. I zoomed with her and read it then, and then because I was talking to her again, I reread it. It's a beautiful,
Oh, nice.
really, really interesting book, that is sort of like mine, about teenagers in high school, but also not really at all. And is really, really interesting. And also look at that cover.
Oh, I know. I love it. I haven't seen that book. I'll have to check that
It is
out.
she's such a cool writer. This is her third novel, and they are all very different from one another, and they're all really, really very cool.
So
And did
something
you,
you, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just, if Stacey got Stranger Care on there, because I was talking too fast.
Oh,
The Sarah Santilli's book.
oh yeah. So something you said earlier, I wanted to come back to just because it stuck in my head, that you said that you had cut 300,000 words from your book. So was it mostly character stuff? Was it research? I found I had to cut a lot of science research out of my books. I was like throwing in too much science, but I mean, obviously you can't give away plot stuff, but like,
Right.
what was the bulk of what you were cutting and why? And is there anything, like any scenes that are haunting you that you had to cut that
Oh,
that
interesting.
that you long for?
Not really. In fact, mostly it was, as it always is for me, really bad early drafting. So, so one of the things I do is I combine characters, people who start off as three or four different people, or
Yeah,
sometimes
I
seven
do
or
that
eight different
too.
people, get boiled down into like one
Yeah.
person, and so then all of those scenes get cut and changed. I I also like try lots of things, character quirks and different ways that a conversation might go. So I will write a scene 5 or 6 times and then figure out what it is exactly that I want it to do and what I want it to say. And therefore I'll throw out the first six and land on another one, or I will be wrong about something that I've guessed early on.
Oh, yeah.
Like I have them going sledding, but then it turns out by way of revisions that no, this actually has to happen in the summer, and I didn't realize that because I didn't
Yeah.
have the timeline lined down, and so then I have to get rid of that scene and replace it with something that happens in the summertime.
Yes.
That kind of thing. It is, however, interesting to me always that I think, oh, I'm going to cut less this book because I'm not doing those giant, like what you're talking about. I have all this research and I need to get rid of it. It is just a sentence at a time that adds up to 300,000 words.
Yes, I know.
Astonishing.
It shocks me at the end. I'm sure you probably have those words that haunt you, like just and really and very.
Yeah.
And then when I go through and I search them, I can cut thousands of words out of a manuscript just by like looking at my adverb choices and trimming them down. So there's a lot of ways to cut. But I know, like when I was writing Waiting for the Night Song, there's this one scene in my book, and I think you've read it. There was a scene that involves a bear. So I just will leave it at the bear scene was my favorite, and I loved it. I was so attached to it and had to get cut in an early draft. And I was so devastated that I just was like literally sobbing when I cut the scene out. And then in the very last draft, I found a way. It was it was over my shoulder to bring back the bear, bring back the bear. And I found a way that it more authentically fit into the book. And it is my favorite scene in my book. But after I cut it, I was like in mourning for this little scene that I just felt very attached to. So I love talking to writers about the things they cut and how it happens.
Yeah. Well, and it's, first of all, it's a beautiful scene. It's a really, really cool scene. It haunts me. And also I think though that when they speak to you like that, like that's how you know.
Yeah.
That's how you know that the rest of the cuts were okay. It's because they didn't call to you anymore. And the one that's sitting over your shoulder yelling at you, you think like, well, okay, that must want to go back in.
Yeah, and also should remind our listeners, if you have any questions for Laurie about her writing process, about her research, to throw them in there because there's so much to this book. And it's not your first book. So, and I would actually, while everybody else is thinking of their questions, since I'm a newbie, this is my debut novel. So I only know book launches during a pandemic. That's my only experience in the literary world. But you've had other books launch, and I'd love to know how it was different for you, and if there were things that you will take with you. Presumably your next book will launch in happier times, and you won't have to. It's the only way I can think that it will be. But are there things you'll take with you that you've learned from, because you've launched books in person, you've now launched on Zoom, and how has that been different?
Yeah. I mean, it's great. That's a great question. And one of the things is that I think book launches are always really different from one another because, I mean, some people write books really quickly, and I unfortunately I don't have them.
Me neither.
4 years pass really between books, and therefore you like the world changes and you change, and so book launches change too. I think I I'm not super wild about getting up in front of people and talking. So the actual launch event, which I usually do at my wonderful local bookstore, which is Elliott Bay Books in Seattle, in front of a giant room full of everyone I know, is terrifying to me. So I miss doing it. I miss seeing everybody. But I definitely slept better this round for doing it virtually instead of live. I didn't have to find shoes. I think the shoes are like the hardest part of book tour.
I love that.
You have to like get up every night in a nice outfit and look like a reasonable person. So you need those shoes, but you also, it's like a lot of like running around through airports and like using gyms in hotels. And so, okay, you're going to need different shoes for that. And, all of these things. You want to travel light because you don't want to have to check a bag, because you're going to get on an airplane every day, because that's what book tour is like.
Yeah.
I think the biggest and most important difference is that we have been able to have CART transcription, so live closed captioning that Susan is doing right now, on every single event. And we've had ASL interpretation in lots of them as well. And that makes these events accessible to lots of people for whom bookstore events are not accessible. And I think that's fantastic. And I think that it will become more and more the norm and the expectation going forward. And I think it's so important and a really wonderful thing.
No, I agree. I've seen more of that, especially towards the latter half of the pandemic. I think there's been a lot more attention to accessibility. I think in the beginning, everybody's scrambling, like, how do we do this? My book came out in January, and as much as I wish it was a live launch, there had been so many months of authors ahead of me that had navigated how you launch a book during a pandemic. Like how I sat in on so many of these Zoom events to kind of get best practices, like where do I sit, and what, all these little things that, and the other thing is, you're staring at yourself for a lot when you're on Zoom, which is very different than speaking. You're like, oh, my nose looks shiny today, or, it's a different experience than being in front of a live crowd. But I've also found a lot of warmth in it in a really weird way, of being able to connect with people in a different, just like right now, like talking with you. Might not have happened.
It might not have happened. Yeah. Although next we do this in person, I hope we will be able to meet in person.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it is really nice to connect this way. Even if it is a little bit second best, it is, and it's nice to see into people's homes. It's nice to have these conversations, which are really pretty intimate. And I don't look at myself; I only look at you. So that's also the like super bonus, I feel like, of doing these in conversations. You don't have to look at yourself.
Yes, that is the beauty of some of the events. Like I think on Crowdcast, it's just you on the screen, which is very disconcerting. But yeah, it's been a big learning curve technology-wise. But I think that there's elements of this that I think will, I hope will move forward. That some maybe hybrid events where they're live but streamed, and I think that the librarians and the booksellers out there have been like such heroes, but doing these events like night after night with authors from all, coordinating all these events is so much work, and
so much work.
And, and I don't know how much payoff there is on an individual event, but that the whole keeping the literary conversations going is like, I feel like I have this joke I always make, that like when this is all over, I want to go on a tour, not a book tour, but like a bookseller hugging tour. Right. So I just want to like find every bookseller who supported my book and just hug them. Yeah. I will not do that until the pandemic's over. I promise. I'm not going to ambush hug people, but I would like to.
Yeah, for sure. And it has been heroic work. It has been really the most important thing, I think. I mean, it is what we were talking about before. It is supporting your community. And it is something that I think we have seen so much that it is just irreplaceable. It is the most important thing. It is the thing that we need most.
We haven't talked about your writing process. I'd be really curious, since you've, I'm really asking all these for just very personal stuff. I just want to know, like I've got my one book under my belt, so I want to know what other writers are doing. What is your writing process like, and has it changed over the years from book to book?
It has, although I think it is less book to book than as my kid grows up.
Mm-hmm.
The years when when I couldn't take my eyes off of her, when she could not be ignored at all, or different than required a different sort of vigilance. I mean, paying for babysitting is very motivating as far as book writing goes, I found at the time.
Yeah.
And then she went to school, but it turned out that school is not really anything like 40 hours a week of childcare. And so I was really, really vigilant and good about sitting down whenever she was out of the house and writing. And now for the last year and a half, she's not been out of the house, and so it's sort of working all around those issues. I find that that there's a tiny bit of magic in it, that I can't explain, and the rest of it is like butt plus chair for what ends up being just hours and hours and hours at a time. I am a person, I don't outline. I just write very, very bad drafts, and I revise and revise and revise and revise and revise and revise. I start at the beginning and go to the end, and then turn around and go right back to the beginning and go to the end and go right back to the beginning and go back to the end. I don't know how else to do it. It is not a, how do I say this? It was not an efficient process, but it is one that is increasingly gratifying, I find, and I am lucky because I like all of the steps of that process. I think that there are some people who really like to draft, but they don't like to revise, or vice versa, or they only like the revision when it gets to like late stage, say, like they like picking at the language, but they're not interested in overhauling the first part. And that makes sense to me because those things are essentially different jobs.
They are, yeah.
The process of drafting is completely different than late stage revisions.
Yeah.
But I really like all of them. So I'm pretty happy during the writing process, and I definitely have my significant challenges, but they are not, as it happens, forcing myself to sit down and do it.
Oh, that's good.
And so that is luck, is what that is.
Yeah.
And I feel very, lucky about that. There are a lot of things I have to make myself do, but sitting down and writing is not one of them.
Oh, that's good.
And it's good because I need a lot of hours to do it.
When I was writing the first book, Waiting for the Night Song, I have 4 kids, and they were young when I was writing the book. So it took 13 years, but it was 13 years of stolen moments.
Yeah.
Like waiting in the car to pick kids up from school, in the dentist office, at soccer games. It was pieced together stolen moments over 13 years. And then the second book, when I saw, my book was sold as a 2-book deal. So then I was under contract to come up with a second book, and I did not have 13 years to finish, but they're older now. So, I'm rediscovering how to write because I have the ability to sit down and write for hours at a time. Whereas before it was like, okay, I've got 20 minutes. What am I going to do? I got to revise this scene. So I'm still, I think, discovering myself as a writer, because I have a different time availability now.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect, actually. I think that's exactly how you want to, how that is. I think I'm forever telling people to use those stolen moments. That I get so much writing done in the car waiting for carpool. Those 20 minutes are huge, and often sometimes I actually bring my laptop in the car, but often it's just a question of like, you're sitting there with your brain and not on the phone and not talking to anybody and not looking at anything or looking anything up if it's quiet, and then you can just think like, okay, what does happen next in this book? And then later when you get home, all you have to do is write it down. My goal is always to write as fast as I can type, and that requires me to have thought the entire thing through before I sit down to do it. But therefore, if I take all of those moments in the shower and walking the dog and waiting for carpool, they add up, and one becomes quite a bit more productive, I think, than if I were like, oh, I'm not even going to start if I don't have 4 hours in
right.
my desk and my ergonomic chair, then I never get anything done.
I used to show up early to the pickup line at school, get there early on purpose, because no one can get to me in the carpool line. And I like to hear my dialogue out loud a lot of times.
Oh, yeah.
And so I would take my phone so that any passersby would think I was on the phone, but I was really talking to myself. Like playing with dialogue and having he said this and then she said this. And but I was talking, anybody who walked by, I'm just like, hi, I'm on the phone, can't talk right now. But that was my cover story was, and I'd record myself sometimes to hear what the dialogue sounded like. And yeah, so that was my cover story. So I just blew it. If any of the carpool moms from my kids' school saw me on the phone, I was probably not really on the phone. I was talking to myself in my car. I still do that.
Funny. Okay, yeah, I'm going to steal that. That's a really good idea. I love that.
It it works. Sometimes you need to talk to yourself, but I sometimes feel like I need to hear things how they sound out loud, especially dialogue.
Yeah.
Which
yeah,
is
for sure.
Yeah. So
for sure.
So when is you said you're working on a new book? Is there a time? Do you have a date yet, or anything that we can be?
I do not. I do not have a date yet. We'll see how it goes.
Okay. I'm just being anxious. I want to read it. So.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that, and I hope it won't be too long. But some books write easy and some books write hard, and this one is not good yet. It persists in not quite coming together. In fact, some of it is that it is overly long at the moment, so I need to cut it. There's too much of it right now, and I cannot at the moment tell what to cut. So I need to figure that out in order to cause it to move forward.
Yes, no, I am wrestling with a messy draft right now too. So it's a lot of work, but it's fun. It's like a puzzle, like putting a puzzle together, like finding what's working and what's not working and why. And those aha moments feel so good. Like when you figured that thing out that wasn't working, it's such a good feeling. So I know that Belmont Books audience tends to draw a lot of writers into and there's there's an organization called Grub Street in Boston that is there's a lot of the Grub Street writers are big fans of Belmont Books. I wonder if you have it, like, what are your best writer tips? Because I have a feeling there's probably going to be writers as well as readers, and if you have any good writing, I'm also maybe asking for myself.
Yeah, gosh, for sure. One of the things that I tell students all the time, and in fact make students do all of the time, is write about what they read, and that's probably good advice for a bookstore crowd who are also writers. People ask me a lot for favorite writing books. Books about writing. And I don't actually necessarily recommend books about writing. There are lots of really wonderful ones, but I find that they are often giving advice that for whatever reason doesn't apply to you in your writing process, and it makes people feel bad because they feel like, oh, I should be doing this thing and I'm not doing it, and therefore I'm failing somehow. And I don't think that's true, because I just think everybody's writing process is personal, and it's a lot of work to figure out what works for you, but it isn't going to be what works for anybody else. But what I do tell people all the time is read a lot while you're writing. I write with a book in my lap, which is not for everyone, and presents posture challenges, I think. But if not in your lap, at least that afternoon. I think that reading while you're writing is the way that you learn how to write. But then what I always have students do, and what I always do myself, is write about it. So when I finish a book, I write down, okay, here's what this book was doing, here's what worked about that, and how it was made to work, and here's what didn't work and why it didn't work, and here's how that applies to me and my writing and my current manuscript in progress, and here's what I've learned, and I actually list it. I start with one and just make a numeric list.
That's fascinating. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
And to have, to be able to go back and look at what your books you've read in the past and what worked for you it's probably pretty inspiring. That's great. I might steal that idea.
Okay. Well, it's not stealing, because it's a free exchange of ideas.
I'm going to take on that idea.
Yes. Yeah, it is, it is something that I, at every level, no matter what I'm teaching, I have students do always. And it is something that I do it without fail. I do it as a practice. And I find it to be, especially at the beginning, it was really clarifying about really concrete things. Like if I want this thing to be revealed on page 350, I need to have planted that seed
Yeah.
4 times at 75-page intervals. I mean, it's like really, really specific like that.
Yeah.
That I learned from watching other people do it.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I'm looking at the clock and I am like completely, I was having so much fun talking with you. We're almost at the hour, but I just want to remind people, since we're here to talk about this amazing book, that you can get it at Belmont Books. It is a beautiful read. If you like sister stories, if you like stories about women, small town women standing up and fighting the power, it engages environmental actions, all the things I love. And it's just a great read. The sisters are so endearing, and I love their mom. We didn't even talk about the mom. I love their mother. She's a fighter and a fierce mama. So many good things about this book for so many different people. It's not just a category book. It's not just a book about one thing. And I think there's things in there that so many people are going to enjoy. And I'm so grateful, Stacy, to you guys for reaching out to me to be in conversation, because I got an early copy of it and I was very excited. And it's been a pleasure to meet you. And is there, anything else you'd like to, leave folks with before we hand it back to Stacy?
No, I mean, exactly that. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for doing this with me. And I've been thrilled to be here. Next time in person.
This was so great, both of you. Thank you so much for doing this. Julie, I knew what I was doing when I reached out to you, because you two really made just such a great pairing. So I'm very happy about that. And I want to say that I saw Laurie with Charlotte McConaughey when they did an event together, and I had already read the book and already really liked it, but I just could tell from the way that she was talking. I mean, you're just such a genuine person, Laurie, and it just really comes across, and it's really very nice. I will say that I read both of these books and they're both really good, so I can't recommend them enough. Susan, I also want to say thank you so much for doing the closed captions. We appreciate that. And to everybody who came tonight, I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you so much for giving us your time. And have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Julie. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.